We continue our weekly series with the Innocence Project, beginning with an update on a case we've been following closely. Rodney Reed has spent more than 20 years living on death row in Texas. He was convicted by an all-white jury of killing a white woman back in 1996. Rodney has always maintained his innocence, and since his conviction, evidence has surfaced pointing to his innocence, including a new revelation that prosecutors hid witness testimony from jurors during the trial. Not surprising. All right, here to discuss where Rodney's case currently stands is his lawyer and staff attorney for the Innocence Project, Jane Pucher. Jane, thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you so much.
Before we get to where Rodney's case stands, could you briefly walk through the facts of his case for viewers who may not know?
Of course. Rodney was convicted of killing a woman named Stacy Stites, who was found on the side of a sort of deserted road in the middle of the country outside of a town called Bastrop, Texas, which is about a 45-minute drive from Austin. And the only reason why Rodney became tied to the crime a year after her murder is because there was a very small amount of his sperm that was found in her body. And the reason that his sperm was found in her body is that Rodney and Stacy were having an affair. He said it at the time. There were plenty of people who knew about it. And part of what we're going to talk about tonight is the fact that the state actually hid evidence that they had in their own files, showing that the state also knew that Rodney and Stacy were having an affair, and that was the reason why his sperm was found in her body. But because of that, despite him saying we were sleeping together, we were having an affair, the state didn't listen, and he was prosecuted and convicted and sentenced to death. The main suspect for the year until his sperm was identified was Stacy's fiance, a man named Jimmy Fennell, who had a violent history and who would go on about a decade after Stacy's death to sexually assault and kidnap a woman while working as a police officer in a different part of the state of Texas. And he went on to serve 10 years in prison for that crime. Jimmy Fennell had told people that he thought Stacy was having an affair. He told people that he thought Stacy was having an affair with a black man, and that made him very angry. Mm-hmm. And after, when Mr. Fennell was in prison serving his sentence, he actually confessed to two other people and told them that he killed his fiance because she was sleeping with a black man. He didn't use those words, but that's what he said. So there was a ton of evidence at the time that Rodney was prosecuted pointing to Jimmy Fennell. There is even more clear, just clear as day evidence now showing that he's the person who did this. But yet the state has dug in its heels and continues to insist that Rodney was the person who did this. And I think they're doing that in part because they know that they have wrongfully convicted a man and kept him on death row for almost a quarter century, and they can't turn back from that now.
Well, okay, so in December, you filed a new appeal alleging that for the last 2 decades, prosecutors have withheld information that they could have led to Rodney's exoneration. So what information specifically is that? Because you just listed off a bunch of information that would point to his innocence at the time he was prosecuted. So what did they actually keep from his lawyers, from the jury?
So at Rodney's trial, the state told the jury that they had searched high and low and that there was nobody who ever connected Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites. This is a case that really hinged on race, the fact that Rodney is a black man and Stacy was a white woman. And the prosecutors told the jury, there's no way that this young, nice white lady would have been associating with Rodney, and because he's a black man. And they told the jury, we interviewed hundreds of people. We interviewed all of Stacy's coworkers. She worked at a chain grocery store called H-E-B. We interviewed tons of H-E-B coworkers, and every person said, yeah, they have no connection. They don't know each other. Nothing to see here. Well, it turns out in their files, they actually had evidence showing that one of Stacy's coworkers, a woman named Suzanne Hugan, who was a good friend of Stacy's, who worked closely with her, had gone to police shortly after Stacy was killed and said, I saw Stacy with a black man who she introduced as Rodney in the store. They were snuggling, canoodling, flirting. Very apparently something romantic was going on. And she told that to police investigators at the time. The state also turned over information showing that two other employees from the HEB grocery store also came forward to say that they had heard rumors that Rodney and Stacy knew each other and that Rodney came to the store to see her. And this was so critical because at the time, Rodney presented some evidence showing that he and Stacy knew each other, but it's people that he knew, his family, his friends, people that a jury could easily discount as folks who may stretch the truth to try to help someone they care about. But the state knew at the time that there were people who were close to Stacy, who knew Stacy, who had nothing to give or to help Rodney for, who saw Stacy and Rodney together. And one woman who said, yeah, they seem to be romantically involved. And that directly supported his defense, and it directly undermined the state's case. And that was hidden until now.
So I was going to ask, did Rodney have an opportunity at his trial to say that he actually had a relationship with the victim in the case? And did his attorneys not have the opportunity to interview neighbors, coworkers, and the like?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. The state in this case served a witness list of several hundred people just a few months before Rodney was set to go to trial. A capital murder case is an incredibly intense, stressful occurrence, and it requires a lot of investigation from attorneys who are working on it full time. And his attorneys in this case just simply were not given the opportunity to do the investigation that they needed to do to represent him and to find these witnesses, to find people who could have supported what Rodney was saying, which is that, I knew her, we were sleeping together, and, I never did anything harmful to her, but we were sleeping together. And, I think her fiance was upset about that. Her fiance was a cop in this small town. He was a white man. He had lots of power. He knew lots of people. And, he had the ability to make things happen and, to potentially kill his fiance and try to, brush that under the rug and get out from the, the line of fire. But Rodney's attorneys were not able to do the investigation that they needed to do. They asked for continuances from the court. Those were not granted, and they were forced to go to trial, frankly, unprepared. So this evidence was not able to come out. But the real tragedy here is that the state, if it had been doing what it's supposed to do, which is to seek justice, which is to put the interests of justice ahead of just gaining a conviction, they would have given this information over to the defense and said, look, here's a witness who says something that's helpful to your client that directly supports his defense. And it's your right, it's your client's right for you to go investigate that. And they could have potentially called these people as witnesses at trial. And we believe that he never would have been convicted if that had happened.
Jane, I always have to say this, and I mean on a weekly basis, when prosecutors choose finality over fairness, I can't understand it. Well, tell me this. In 2019, just 5 days before he was scheduled to die, Rodney was granted an indefinite stay of execution by the governor, sparing his life for now, but he's still on death row. He's confined to a tiny room for 23 hours a day. What's his spirit like, especially in light of this new filing, and where does this case go from here?
Rodney is incredibly strong. He really gets so much from the people who support him. He has a huge community of supporters in the States and around the world, people who write to him, who post on his Facebook page, who find every way they can to let him know that they are out there supporting him. He has an incredible family, his mother, his brothers, kids, grandkids, people who are all in his corner all the time. But you are absolutely right. It is incredibly isolating. He is in a cell for 23 hours a day. COVID has been incredibly difficult for people on the row. They are even more isolated than they normally are. They have very little access to the phone, to any kind of contact with the outside world. So he is so grateful for opportunities for us to get his story out there. It means so much to him to have me be on the show, for example, and to really hear people understanding and championing his innocence here and around the world.
Well, we're definitely going to be watching this case very closely, and definitely invite you back on the show for any updates. Jane Pucher, thank you so much for your time tonight with the Innocence Project. Appreciate you.